Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV and the first of a double bill today. This is a 45 show. Then later on, we're going back to 44 with the 50th Division UK in Normandy. But anyway, we have followed the US 1st Division with my guest, Stephen Clay, from Sicily to Normandy, across the Rhine into Germany. Today, we look at the last kilometer into Czechoslovakia and the end of the war in Europe. I'll bring him in now. It's morning where you are. How are you today, Steve?
Better than I deserve, as usual.
As usual, yes. So, we were just discussing that for us as historians, the war in Europe ends on May the 8th, but it's not quite so neat for units that were still in Europe. There's the occupation period. There's the beginning of the gradual heating up of the Cold War and all those kind of things there. So when all the staff rides and things like that you've taken and the discussions you've had, at what point do you feel that World War II really comes to an end in terms of when we discuss the impact of it?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and as you kind of already alluded to, it's difficult to differentiate. Okay, when does the war really end versus when does the Cold War begin, and so forth. And as we had discussed, I see the evidence of the Cold War beginning almost immediately. With the First Division, some of the friction that they're running into with the Soviet forces while they're still in Czechoslovakia. And of course it carries over when they move back into Germany and so forth. So but then there's the post-war hangover stuff that they have to deal with. I'll talk about a little bit in this episode, but it's really more a discussion for the post-war period.
And then of course the gradual changing of doctrine to the Allies, the Western Allies being the numerically superior force, trying to deal with a perhaps technologically superior force, to the Cold War, where the Western Allies sort of become the numerically inferior force, dealing now with the numerically superior force of the Warsaw Pact. So that the beginning of all the building of the legends of the German tank aces and things like that, and the proficiency of the Germans. So that even that, you see that, if you look, I'm sure you looked at those kind of infantry reports written at Fort Benning in 1946, 1947. They're already thinking about, okay, the Germans did this quite well. We need to think about doing this quite well for the war that's coming. You see that transition period. But we're digressing of going into a massive, great rabbit hole about post-war doctrine. So we won't do that now. So what we'll do is we'll just talk about what we were supposed to do, which is the First Division of Czechoslovakia. So over to you, Steve.
Okay. Well, just kind of, again, I like to try and kind of go up here and put everything into context for your listeners and so forth. And I know most of them are aware of all this, but for those who aren't, you need to understand where this fits into the big picture. And so, we're talking April, May 1945. The war's coming to an end, and via the Yalta Agreement, Czechoslovakia is supposed to be left to the Russians. Okay, they're supposed to liberate Czechoslovakia and so forth. Eisenhower's priority at this point was Austria. He wanted to move Patton's Third Army farther south to get into Austria and liberate big swaths of it anyway. In order to do that, however, he's got to expand the First Army boundary to the vicinity of the Ore Mountains in the northern Czech border. If we can go to the next, I'm getting ahead of myself here real quick. Let's go to the next slide. These are things I'm going to talk about. I already started talking about the third slide already, but for your listeners' benefit, I'm going to talk about, what happens. We're at the Harz Mountains with the First Division. What happens with the movement down to Cheb, the Cheb area. And then what the plan of attack into Czechoslovakia was going to be, what the preliminaries are. And again, I'll get back into the context of everything, what the advance consisted of, how that went, the German surrender. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about a guy named Corporal Samuel L. Fuller, who many of your listeners know who he is, but I'll re-educate him again. And then the liberation of the Falkenau and Zwodow concentration camps. And then give you kind of a summary of the First Division in World War II. So those are the things I'm going to cover. Right there at the end of the Harz Mountains campaign, you'll see there at the top of the slide where it says St. Andreasburg, Harz Mountains. That's where all that takes place. On the 24th of April, the First Division assembles in a little town, or near a little town called Blankenberg. And you'll see that right up there near the Harz Mountains. well, 5 days prior to that, on the 19th of April, the division gets a warning order that it's going to end up moving south down to the vicinity of Czechoslovakia. So on the 24th, they move to that assembly area and begin the preparations to move. And they start moving actually that day, some of them. And by the 27th of April, the divisions move down to Hof in Germany. And you can see that, follow that dotted line. That's the route that they took. Yep. And you'll see the town of Hof there. The division starts to assemble there. The following day, the 16th Infantry, who's going to be in the center sector of the 1st Division going into Czechoslovakia, moves to the city of Cheb, right on the Czech border. So that's where the like I said, the 16th Infantry gets set up. The 26th is going to be the north of there, about where Hof is to the east, and then the 18th Infantry will be to the south of that, and then finally to the south out of the 18th, it's going to be the 9th Armored Division. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, and you'll see kind of a depiction of all that. Okay, so on the 2nd of May, the division is going to start moving to positions to forward. Now, as you can see at the top of the slide there, it says 26th Infantry. That's their area. You see the boundary that the 26th Infantry was north of. Center sector, as I said, 16th Infantry. On the 2nd of May, the 1st and 2nd Battalions move forward, and they set up between Bad Brombach and the town of Franzensbad. And you can see Franzensbad down there, kind of almost center sector. And then south of that is Eger, now known as Cheb, and that's where the 18th Infantry initially sets up. Now, there's going to be a slight boundary shift to that later, but I'll talk about that here momentarily. Initially, the 3rd Battalion stays back in the vicinity of Cheb with the regimental headquarters until later, and I'll get to that. Now, there's a delay in the actual advance into Czechoslovakia other than this movement on the 2nd and 3rd of May into those new lines. Why does that happen? Well, a number of things. This is a very complicated, complex operation. It takes some time, like I say, to get the 1st Division south. The boundary of the 1st Army shifted south. The movement of the 12th Corps of the 3rd Army down toward Austria to conduct their mission. There was also some confusion over the planned Soviet offensive, which was supposed to start on the 5th or 6th of May, but it gets delayed because of an uprising in Prague that's caused by a number of political factions that are agitating against the German occupation and so forth. That causes the Soviets to kind of hold up a little bit, kind of like what they did in Warsaw, or maybe not for the same reasons, but they don't go in right away. So, and then there's of course the actual command shift. The 1st Division shifts initially from 5th Corps, and then the 8th Corps takes over it because the 12th Corps has already moved out, and then the 5th Corps has to move down. They finally get put back under the 5th Corps. So you have all these command changes and shifts before you can actually launch this offensive into Czechoslovakia. So that's what causes all the delays for several days. Now, in addition to that, there's a number of other events that take place that most folks are very well aware of. 30th of April, Hitler commits suicide. 2 days later, Berlin falls to the Soviet Army, the Red Army. On the 3rd of May is when the 16th Infantry finally gets into their positions. The very last unit to get in position is G Company, which goes into Franzensbad, which is going to become the regimental headquarters a little bit later. It's also the day, the 3rd of May, where the division gets put back under the 5th Corps, because by that time the 5th Corps got its headquarters down there, set up to really be operational, plus the Corps support units that are moving down to be able to support this offensive. Finally, on the 5th of May, the 16th Infantry moves its regimental headquarters to the Post Hotel in Franzensbad, and the 3rd Battalion comes up and relieves part of the front there from the 18th Infantry. The boundary shifts down to Eger, and you can see with the 3rd, it's very hard to see because they're really small icons, but you see Eger, you'll see the icon there for the 3rd Battalion. So you got the 16th Infantry along that front now, 18 to the south, 26 to the north. Now, what I'd like to do is show you a number of images. I did this in the last video also, of things that are kind of going on that fit this time period that kind of help tell the story, because visual images a lot of times are a lot more understandable, visible, and they help things give you a better picture of what really goes on.
Just a quick question for you, Steve. Ian asked about, there's lots of obviously political discussions going on between Eisenhower and the people around him. Would people within the First Division, the G2, for example, would they be now getting sort of geopolitical information along with the standard intelligence information? Because earlier in the war, it's all about the strategic, objectives. It's all about getting across those rivers, seizing Sicily. Are they getting a picture of the political situation, or does that not concern divisional commanders? They just get told what to do and not necessarily why?
I haven't run across anything specific about that, but I would just say this: a couple things. One, General Andrus is the division commander. He's talking to General Hubner. Hubner's got the Fifth Corps. It wouldn't surprise me if there's some kind of discussions going on at that level about. I mean, they're kind of aware of what's happening up at that level, because they're getting intel briefs and whatever. Down below that level, I think everybody's too busy trying to fight the war and get this thing over with. They're thinking about, okay, this thing's going to end pretty soon. I want to try to get as few soldiers killed as possible, or I don't want to be killed. That sort of thing for the private soldiers. So I don't think that's of any big concern to them at this point. Now, as the war ends and things start shaping up and they have time to think about it, maybe so. But I think at this point, it's to the average person below, Corps division level, they're just not thinking about that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so these pictures, by the way, were taken by a guy named Major Tom McCone. He was the regimental S4. These pictures are shown at the train station in Franzensbad the day after that the regimental headquarters gets moved in. In fact, that Jeep that you see in the first picture, that is his Jeep. And you'll see the same Jeeps there in the other pictures. And you got some soldiers from the S4 section there that are set up in the Franzensbad train station. The next picture, if you go to the next slide, is fascinating to me, because it shows this German hospital train that was captured on the 3rd of May when G Company actually gets there and occupies the town. Why I find it interesting is that very train is going to end up being used to haul away wounded German POWs back into Germany within a few days, and which leads me kind of to, which I'll talk about more in a minute, some of the issues that the division, in fact, all the Brits, the Americans, even the French, are going to have to deal with when the war really does end, and in some cases even before the war ends. So. The other picture I put in there really for identification purposes. I find it fascinating because that is McCone's traveling S4 shop. I don't think that that's an American piece of equipment. Now, if any of your readers, or your listeners, have I seen anything like that before, I'd like to know. But I think it's a piece of German equipment that's been captured and now being used by McCone. The one thing I would say about it is it looks like it has deuce and a half tires on it. But beyond that, I've never seen anything that looks like that in the American Army. But maybe some of your guys can.
One of the railway guys might well know. I'll message a few people. Yeah, but we don't want the railway geeks coming in now, because they'll derail the conversation. See what I did there, folks?
No, I got it. Yeah. Okay. All right. So next slide. I talked about how the 16th Infantry goes into the post hotel. This is a pre-war postcard of the post hotel that I was able to get a copy of, and that's where the regimental headquarters is. Up that this picture you see to the right is the regimental staff and battalion commanders. The guy that's third from the right, that's Colonel Gibb, the regimental commander, and McCone, the guy that took the other pictures. He's the guy all the way to the right, and I won't name all the other guys, but there's if we were to do a post-war thing about this friction between the Soviets and the First Division, and this is where a lot of this is going to take place, and I've got some interesting stories about that. But anyway, let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. And this gets to be very, very busy. First off, let me talk about the enemy situation. Facing the 1st Division at this point is the German 12th Corps. It's commanded by a guy named Lieutenant General Herbert Osterkamp. And the unit that's facing the 1st Division specifically is Comfort Beneke, which is an ad hoc division. And it's a very interesting organization because of what's what's in it. It's composed of OCS candidates, Officer Candidate School candidates, future officers from the Milowitz OCS School. It's got a number of Hitler Youth companies that are in it. And probably one of the more interesting things in it, it's got the company from the battlecruiser Admiral Scheer, the Marines. It's a marine company from the Admiral Scheer. For your history buffs, they know that the Scheer is the sister ship of the Graf Spee, which was the battlecruiser sunk off the River Plate by the British Navy back in December 39. But the fact that he got Marines from a battleship out there facing these guys is kind of interesting to me. At any rate, so the advance is supposed to kick off on the 5th of May, but again, because of some of the other delays I talked about, particularly the Soviets, it gets delayed till the following morning, and they kick off about 0600 that morning. Now, the division's immediate objective is Carlsbad. Eisenhower had placed a line between Pilsen, Carlsbad, and Budweis as the line of limited advance for American forces going into Czechoslovakia, and the 1st Division has Carlsbad as its objective, and that's about 50 kilometers to the east. The 16th Infantry's immediate objective is the town of Falkenau, and that's it's now known as Sokolov, by the way, and that's that red circle you see in the right-hand side of the slide. Now, I've also circled in there the little town of Zwodow, and as I mentioned earlier, that's the town where one of the 2 concentration camps that the 16th Infantry is going to liberate here, which, again, I'll talk about here shortly. So, it kicks off on the 6th of May, starting with the 1st Battalion up north. They begin the advance, all of them begin the advance on time. 1st Battalion moves a couple of kilometers when they run into this Marine company from the Admiral Scheer. And they end up having this running firefight all day long against a number of strong points and roadblocks and so forth against these Marines, and suffer a number of casualties due to their efforts. The 2nd Battalion, which is right there in the center, that's that wide axis that you see, they run into very little opposition during the day. A few skirmishes here and there, but nothing, no great firefights or anything like that. The 3rd Battalion in the south ends up advancing a number of kilometers until they get to the town of Kulsam. Now, Kulsam, if you look at that axis that the 3rd Battalion is going right there near the boundary, it'll come to a split. And Kulsam, as you'll see, is right there in the middle of that. What happens there is the Germans have a strong point that's with a number of 88 millimeter guns. I don't know if they're AT guns or if they're anti-aircraft artillery pieces. I think they're probably AA guns. But anyway, it's a very, very stiff fight, but they ultimately end up taking the town as well as the bridge intact. Now, why that's important is because the 9th Armored Division, or actually technically CCA of the 9th Armored Division, is moving with the 18th Infantry in the south, and they can't find any bridges to cross. So the CCA is, directed to head up north. They get up there, they conduct the passage lines at Kulsam with the 3rd Battalion, and continue to head to move their movement east, unhindered by no bridges and so forth. So those are the major actions that take place on this first advance. At the end of the day, the regiment suffers about 51 casualties, which are going to be the last casualties they suffered during World War II. The following day, once again, 0600, they kick off on the 7th of May, and all 3 battalions move about 2 kilometers when all of a sudden a message crackles over the radio net saying, "Cease all forward movement." A little while later, another message comes across the net saying, hey, the Germans have signed a surrender agreement that will take place at 1 minute after midnight on the 9th of May. So 2 days hence, roughly a day and a half, that all fighting will cease. Well, for all intents and purposes, all fighting ceases in this area at that point. Now, as we kind of alluded to earlier, the fighting ceases. You don't have to worry about, for the most part anyway, people getting shot at and killed any longer, but it creates a whole new set of problems and issues that not only the 1st Division, but all Allied forces now have to deal with, namely German POWs,
Yep.
wounded, family members, concentration camp internees, and displaced persons.
Yep.
All of which you're now responsible for and have to deal with, which creates a huge logistical insecurity burden.
Yeah. It's like you're immediately going from being, hard-nosed infantryman to civil affairs, like on a finger click like that. And it's happening across the front to British and Canadian units as well. And yeah, it's incredibly how quickly it doesn't come to an end. It just transitions immediately to a different set of problems.
Now, I will just add this here, because it's not really part of this presentation, but it's something for people to consider, is that the United States Army, and I suspect the British Army as well, although I can't speak for them, had a very robust, what they called in those days, military government organizations.
Yeah.
We call them civil affairs. They were trained, they were ready for all of this. Well, let me caveat that. They were ready for most of this. Okay, they understood, and they've already dealt with a number of these things advancing across Germany, but not to the level they're about to.
Yeah.
And that goes not just for civil affairs, by the way, military police, logistics organizations, medical organizations, all these organizations realize, hey, we're going to have to deal with this, but the volume and the size of it is going to be massive.
Yeah.
And so that is a story in and of itself that I think is worth somebody telling if you haven't had that done already.
Yeah, we'll do that sometime.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the next few slides. Now, the morning of the 7th, this message comes across. Once again, 1st Division was ready for it. So General Andrus sends off General Taylor. Brigadier General Taylor is the Assistant Division Commander. That's him in the lower left-hand photographs there with his arms folded. By the way, he was the former commander of the 16th Infantry until July 44 as well. He's now the ADC. He gets sent forward to meet with General Osterkamp and with Beneke. And that's what these images here show. They meet at a place called Elbogen. If you can go back one slide real quick, I'll show you where that is. If you look at Falkenau, you'll see a crossroads just to the east of Falkenau. It doesn't show it on the map there, but that's where Elbogen is, and that's where this takes place. Let's go ahead and go back to the picture real quick.
Yeah.
So the guy there in the top center, that's General Osterkamp. He is the 12th Corps guy. The guy in the lower left signing the document with the Taylor is Beneke, and they sign the agreement. This is it's a surrender technically, but it's really as much of anything as an agreement as how are we going to handle this. Okay, here are the things that we need for you to do, Germans, to make this as smoothly as possible. And the Germans are trying to say, get the best deal that they can as well. So there's some negotiation going on. It's really kind of, bottom line is they come to an agreement. And so now we got this problem that we got to deal with as far as getting these guys to bring their troops forward. Now, even before this surrender takes place, there's already a lot of the German soldiers that are coming to all these checkpoints that the 1st Division has set up along these routes back toward Germany to catch deserters, leakers, people surrendering, and so forth. And they're already starting to assemble around these checkpoints, even before the official, not the 1 minute after midnight surrender, but on 6 and 7 and 8, they're already starting to move to surrender and so forth. A lot of them show up with no weapons. The vast majority, of course, show up with their weapons. They get there, they stack their arms, and then they wait for instructions from the American forces. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Now, the 1st Division realized they were going to have a lot of, the war's coming to an end. Okay, what are we going to do with all these German POWs? Well, they started building these detention camps in the vicinity of Cheb, and or Cheb, that is. And these detention camps really were nothing more than for all intents and purposes, a string of barbed wire or two, or in a big, open area that they would feed them into there to be able to process these POWs. And of course, the idea was as they gathered a whole bunch of German troops, they'd send escorts with them back to this location, turn them in there, and then come back. Most of that done by MPs, but even done by combat soldiers who were detailed to do that. There were even cases where they didn't have anybody to send, and so they tell the guy in charge, okay, lieutenant, captain, colonel, private, whatever, take these guys down the road, go to this location, and turn yourself in. And it turns out most of those guys actually show up and turn themselves in, even though they're walking down the roads unescorted and so forth. By the 9th of May, 27,000 German POWs are processed through the 16th Infantry alone. A total of 45,000 are processed through all units of the 1st Division. Now, what these images show is one of the checkpoints. You'll see there's a German vehicle there. What appears to be a couple of German military policemen. If you look at the guy in the back of that truck there with looks like a clipboard or something with some sort of medallion or something hanging around his neck, and there's another one in the lower left-hand part of the picture. Those are German policemen that are assisting the process of processing these guys to get them back to the POW camp. You'll notice a civilian woman standing there. She is probably the wife of one of the German officers or somebody, maybe just a German civilian that's trying to get out of the way of the Russians. But that was, again, one of the things that was anticipated, but not in the numbers that they actually got. The picture over on the right-hand side, you'll see are German trucks that have come into a checkpoint to surrender. You see a bunch of ammunition on the very right-hand side of the picture. It's all stacked up. And then other supplies of some military use that are stacked up for surrender. And then the very last picture in the bottom is, and I'm sorry these are kind of grainy, but these are the best images I could come up with. I tried to, make them a little bit more. But anyway, you can see the number of German soldiers that are there in this one picture.
Yeah.
Again, what I find is kind of interesting, if you analyze the faces of people, and you see the guy all the way to the right, he looks like a pretty happy camper, and the war's over with. Looks like we'll get the chance to go home to, Dresden or wherever and, raise a family. But he's happy it's all said and done with. Okay, next slide is some more images. And one of the things that was not anticipated was the number of German Wehrmacht Helfer, which is a equivalent of the German Women's Army Corps. Female soldiers. These are mostly typists and, whatever. But they all start showing up as well. And, oh, my, we can't put these in with the POWs at, in Cheb. So they had to very rapidly build another POW detainee center, if you will, in a little town. Let me see, I've got it written down here somewhere. It's Front Lasna. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but they build this for all the women and also the family members, the wives and children of German soldiers, because they didn't want to put them in with everybody else. So they get processed through there as well. And I don't remember what the total numbers were, but there was, I'm guessing somewhere in the 1,000, 1,002. I don't know what the numbers were, but it's quite a few, a lot more than they anticipated. The last photo there is those are German soldiers that are arriving at Cheb to go into the prisoner war camp. I guess that's the motor park where they're parking everything. But I found it was kind of interesting because it's one, because it's color. You see so few World War II pictures that are in color. I don't know if it's been colorized or not, but I don't think so. By the way, it's a Getty image, so I left that on there to give them credit in case anybody wanted to try to get in trouble. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so that's kind of the immediate post-war period. By the way, something I would point out about these detention centers. Again, I didn't know this until I started researching this period for this presentation, but within about a month, the vast majority of those German POWs had been processed and sent home. Within 30 days, most of them were already gone. I didn't realize they released them that quickly. The exceptions, of course, were what were called special category POWs. These are, not surprisingly, German generals, SS soldiers, and colonels and below who were suspected of committing war crimes of some sort.
Mm.
Those were held for a longer period of time to be investigated, to determine whether or not they need to be prosecuted and so forth. Those that seem to have, and the German generals weren't necessarily prosecuted, although there were some. Most of them were held and detained really to get after-action reports from them. And many of those after-action reports, by the way, are right here at Fort Leavenworth, here where I live, that are available for people's use in case they aren't aware of them. They're some pretty good reading. Having said that, even the vast majority of those guys are released within a year. Those that aren't, of course, were the ones who were convicted and held, or in some cases, executed. Okay. Now, let's talk a little bit about what happens immediate post-war with Falkenau. The 1st Division continues to move on the 7th of May into the 8th of May toward their objective, not intending to fight because the war's technically over with. And if they run into anybody, the instructions are basically, hey, get the word to them, because it's probably people who don't know the war's over yet and hadn't got the word. And that, in fact, does happen right here in Falkenau, as a matter of fact. The 3rd Battalion moves into Falkenau that evening, and they discover this concentration camp there. This camp held, somewhere upwards of 1,000 or so, although I've seen different figures, of predominantly Jews, not surprisingly, Czechs, Poles, even Gypsies and so forth, other sorted inmates who were there and basically, for all intents and purposes, slated for death, either through starvation, execution, overwork, disease, and so forth. There was a slight brush with the SS guards there who had not heard the word that the war was over with. Several of them were killed by the 3rd Battalion soldiers, but eventually they get the word and the rest of them surrendered. I suspect, and I haven't seen any details, but I suspect they probably had some German, officers or something with them saying, hey, guys, you got to give up this. It's all done. Okay, so let's go to the, by the way, these images, go back one real quick. These images are Falkenau. One's a wartime picture, or actually a little pre-war. The next one is current, or pretty close to being current. As you can see, there's not a whole lot. I mean, Falkenau, now Sokolov, hasn't changed a whole heck of a lot. They've got a couple of, looks like Soviet era apartment buildings in the background that they painted yellow.
Yeah, looks like it. Yeah.
Probably in the day they were all gray. But anyway, I want to talk a little bit about this guy, Corporal Samuel L. Fuller. In case your listeners don't know who this guy is, I've talked about him before. He is better known as Sammy Fuller, who was the movie director and producer of the movie The Big Red One with Lee Marvin and so forth. He's done a whole bunch of other American movies, a lot of westerns and some war movies and so forth. Interesting guy. He goes with the 1st Division through the entire conflict. Is a corporal, goes all the way to corporal by the end of the war. By the way, he was involved in Hollywood in some form or fashion prior to the war. His family had given him a 16mm camera that he carried with him throughout the war. And he took a number of films during the war that are still in existence, one of which is the films he took of the Falkenau concentration camp. And by the way, that film, I think you can purchase a copy of it. It's still online. And if you go to the next slide, these are images from that slide, or from that film. Now, the following day, a guy named Captain Richmond goes into town. He's the executive officer for 3rd Battalion. He goes into town. He rounds up the mayor and a bunch of other, of the, townspeople of some note, and drags them out to the concentration camp to show them what they've been posting in their neighborhood. Of course, like most of them, they say, "Oh, we didn't know all this was going on. They had no clue." Yada yada yada. Even though the stench was terrible, and that's one of the things Fuller described in his book. I got this from his book, The Third Face, by the way. I don't know how many people are familiar with that book. That's it right there. It's his autobiography. Worth reading the World War II parts if you're a World War II historian and buff. Yeah. Anyway, he talks about the stench and the smell of this place. And he'd run across, he'd seen, you see this at places like Auschwitz and other places where they have the displays of the teeth and the hairbrushes, the glasses. They found all that same stuff there as well. So he films all this. And the first image that you see there, if you look at the on the left hand side, you'll see people standing there on the what looks like a road maybe off to the left there. That's the people that Richmond brought out to observe all this. You can see the bodies laying on what appear to be sheets and so forth. The center picture is one of the American officers from the regiment saluting these dead inmates. The picture in the upper right is those same people taken from a different angle. You can see the guy in the overcoat with the black hat on with his hands behind his back. That's the mayor. The same guy that's on the right-hand side of the line in the other picture. And they're observing all of this. He took pictures or filmed the inside of the barracks. You can see that one guy that the guard there, it's one of the guards, has uncovered a dead body. That's the guy's dead. You can see how emaciated he is. And then another inmate that's there laying on a bunk of some kind, or I'm not sure what it is. You can see how emaciated he is. When they died, they would, like most concentration camps, they'd take the body and put it in the crematorium and burn them. In this case, the Americans took the bodies, laid them out, and then took them to a grave and buried them there. Anyway, and gave them, tried to give them a little bit of dignity in terms of the burial. Let's see if there's, I think up to the. Oh yeah, one of the things that Fuller did say that is that I want to emphasize this because until you experience it, I mean, most people have been out in the woods somewhere and they experience or on a road and they smell roadkill. When you look at that number of bodies, you can imagine the smell, especially when they start burning and everything. The stench was just horrible. He ends up vomiting over it all, and I'm sure there was any number of other guys did as well. Okay, next slide.
Just a quick interjection. We had Marsha Gordon on, who wrote a book about Sam Fuller's war films. It was probably 4 or 5 years ago, and she, having examined as a film student Sam Fuller's work, she absolutely made the suggestion that it was his experience in that camp that basically underlined everything he ever made in terms of filming. He really addressed death and loss and PTSD and what combat does to people, and not just in his war films, but in his film noir like Pick Up on South Street and things like that. And she said without his experience there, he wouldn't have been the filmmaker he was, because we're going down a massive rabbit hole again, but the 50s was notorious for those war films where people just kind of fell down dead and there was no blood, there was no kind of sense of loss. He really, Merrill's Marauders, Steel Helmet, he really showed that death and loss. And so, we can only imagine how much of that experience at Falkenau just stayed with Fuller for the rest of his, despite his big personality and his cigars and stuff. He was deeply troubled individual in some ways.
Yeah. I would recommend this book for those people who don't know about it and read his World War II stuff, because he does the same thing in the book. I talked in the Hartz Mountain thing about the Hitlerjugend kid, and then the follow on to that, where with the 26th Infantry had guys that were executed, had their throats cut by the SS. Units there, and what they did, they took them out and shot them. It's technically a war crime, but that's the reality of war at times. And he does talk about it. In fact, in the movie Big Red One, he shows he shows the capture of the concentration camp, which is actually done at night, but for the movie purposes, it's shown during the day. But you kind of get that visceral feeling, especially. I can't remember the guy who plays, Luke. And
it's Mark Hamill when he looks in the oven, he empties his clip of his M1 clip into an oven, and you don't see what he sees. You only can imagine what he's seeing by what is in his eyes. And And Sam Fuller said the four soldiers in Big Red 1 represented the 4 different personalities that Sam Fuller had. He always reckoned he was like 4 different people. So one's a sensitive one. One of them is Robert Carradine is going to be a writer. That's the artist of Sam
the guy
Fuller
that's a cigar chomper.
Yeah. And Mark Hamill is kind of the conscience. He's the soul, and
the innocent young guy that all of a sudden is now basically committing murder for all intents and purposes.
Great part of a not a perfect film, but a film that's trying to say something. But anyway, back to you and photos.
Okay, so the other camp that was discovered by the 1st Battalion in Voda, and these are images from that. It was a camp for women, and there were about 900 to 1,000 women in this camp, so it's fairly large. And again, various nationalities, same as the other camp. They were better treated by the men. They were fed better, but obviously, given things being what they are, certainly a fair number of them were treated all kinds of indignities as well that you can imagine. I won't go into that. But their mortality rate was much lower because they were fed better. They were used as workers in an aircraft parts factory that you see in the upper right-hand photo there. That's the factory that they worked in to make, it's a wartime factory and so forth. They were also used to build the barracks for this camp. Now, if you look at the very bottom photographs, you'll see the barracks off to the right. That's the barracks I'm talking about. Those are located in the red area that you see in the aerial photograph. That's the actual camp that they were made prisoners in. The other parts of the camp in yellow, all of that was originally part of a textile factory that was converted into this camp by the Germans. And by the way, the photograph that you see there on the left is a lot of happy women being liberated by the 16th Infantry soldiers. So, but once again, it kind of goes back to what I was saying before. You've got all these German POWs you got to take care of. Can you imagine? In fact, with the camp in Falkenau, and I'm sure the same with the women, but really the Falkenau camp, they had to rapidly get in their food, clean water, medical care, medical supplies, to try and save as many of these people as they can. And many of them died despite of the fact. In fact, that's one of the things that Fuller showed in that Big Red 1 movie is Lee Marvin, had a kid that he was trying to take care of. Well, he talks about that. It's actually a little girl that this soldier's trying to take care of, but for obvious reasons, he didn't want to, make any more than it was. But the kid dies later on. He's trying to save this kid, and she doesn't make it because she's just so emaciated that she just dies. And so that again, that's some of the things that I think that are worth thinking about when we talk about post-war problems that the soldiers have to deal with. Okay, final slide. After about a month in Czechoslovakia, the 1st Division gets orders to move out. By this time, most of those POWs have been transferred back into Germany, have been let go, basically. And the division gets orders to move to locations in Bavaria to take up occupation duties. And, that story for another time, perhaps. So what did the 1st Division accomplish in World War II? What was their record? Well, you see it here, 443 days in combat. They suffered a total of 20,000 plus casualties, over 3,600 of them killed. You see where POW line says 1,300. A good number of those were later post-war identified. These are, by the way, post-war figures, immediate post-war figures, but a lot of those soldiers were identified later as having been killed in action when they were verified that they were dead. The division fought in 8 campaigns, 3 of which were awarded with arrowheads on the campaign streamer. An arrowhead means it's an assault landing, and that's either by amphibious landings or by airborne landings, of which the 16th Infantry was in all 3 of those as an assault regiment. 17 presidential unit citations, and you see the breakout there.
Yeah,
different units. 17 medals of honor. 131 Distinguished Service Crosses, of which the 16th Infantry was awarded 93. And you say, well, why so many for the 16th Infantry? Omaha Beach.
Yeah.
About 50 of them were awarded for Omaha Beach. So you can see, what, that's what they were awarded for, that many of them. The division stays in Germany on occupation duties and defensive duties until 1955. It's the last U.S. division to come home after World War II. So with that, I've concluded my presentation. Well, one more slide, sorry. After the war, the Society of the 1st Infantry Division pays for and puts in place 4 obelisks throughout Europe, one of which is at Normandy, at Omaha Beach, one of which is in Buchenbach, Germany, for the Central Germany campaign in Battle of the Bulge. This one is in Cheb in Czechoslovakia, and I don't remember what the other one is, but they all look pretty much the same. And this one, all of them list all the, at this point, the known soldiers that were killed in action during that campaign or campaigns that they represent. Okay, now with that, that concludes my presentation. Barring whatever questions that you have.
Yeah, no, I mean, as always, fantastic stuff. And we probably said it in the last show you did. I mean, there is so much focus on Omaha Beach, the Normandy campaign, perhaps a little bit also in the Sicily campaign earlier. But as we've always said with the historians about this period of the war, it seems like after about February 45, everybody's interest just drops off a cliff. And maybe there isn't quite the same peril in the sense that the outcome is a bit clearer. But as you've made clear in these last 2 or 3 presentations, there's still loss of life. There's still decisions to be made. There's still difficulties. There's still hurdles to overcome. And as I said, as you talked about, the transition to being an occupying force, being, as we say, the broad sweeping civil affairs unit is not discussed enough. And in your speaking to 1st Division veterans and looking at the memoirs, is there any particular feelings about this era that united these veterans? I mean, Sam Fuller's experience in Falkenau obviously would have been similar to other people who were there, but was there sort of a collective feeling of how people summed up that period?
I had the privilege of knowing a whole bunch of these World War II 16th Infantry guys. I joined the association in 1989, I think it was, and a lot of them were still alive. A lot of the guys that that were in these battles and campaigns still remembered them and so forth. I would say that the guys that were with the division / the 16th Infantry, in my case, through most or all of the war, tended to focus on the areas that you're talking about. North Africa, Sicily, Normandy, up to roughly, Remagen Bridge. That's where the heavy lifting goes on. After that, you didn't hear them talk about it much. The guys that did talk about it were the guys who were replacements. They came in after the Battle of the Bulge, because that's their experience. And to them, that experience was as formative and terrifying and impressing on their minds as what these guys had gone through early on. The difference is the guys that were there earlier, it's all old hat at this point. They're battle wise. They're trying to stay alive and all that kind of stuff, and they're seeing things that they've seen time and again. So it's not making that big of an impression. So I think that's probably a big part of it. But the guys, like I say, comes in, late in the war, they tend to focus more on these periods because that's what their experience is. One other thing, I think I might have covered this before in a previous presentation. I think this is true for many in the 1st Division. I know it's true for the 16th Infantry. And Sammy Fuller's one of them, by the way. He is with the regiment from North Africa all the way through the end of World War II. In 1944, he's got the points to go home. He didn't go home. Many
Take your time. I know what you're going to say. I know. Yeah.
These guys, many of these guys that I knew were like that. They had the ability to go home. They had the points.
Yeah.
But they stayed. And they stayed because the reason why all soldiers stay and why they keep up with it, because they're their buddies. You know, yeah, we fight for our country. Yes, they do that. We fight for, you know, home and hearth. Yes, they do that. But when it comes down to it, you fight for the men around you who are helping to keep you alive, and you're helping to keep them alive. And so many of these guys, I was astounded how many of them could have gone home in points, and they didn't.
Yeah.
Stayed through the whole war. And Fuller was one of those guys. Like I said, it's just they're amazing generation.
No, I'm. While you compose yourself, and thank you very much for showing a bit of your emotion there. Harley Reynolds, who I knew very, pretty well, 16. He was one of those. He had enough points to go home. I mean, not quite before D-Day, but not long after. And he would joke about, how many. He said, I had enough points, I could have sold them to other GIs if I'd wanted to. But he was very. By the time I got to know Harley, he was very slick and professional. He was living in Florida. He was doing his presentations down there, clubs and things, and he didn't always show emotion because he was the consummate, storyteller and showman. But if you got him, in a quiet moment, he would talk about that commitment to seeing it through to the end, and and making sure you just didn't. I think he said something like, I didn't want to be back home reading in the newspapers about his mates liberating somewhere else and him not being there. So
I was back home shoveling shit in Louisiana.
Yeah, exactly. And one day I'll share with the viewers the story about how he of the SS officer he captured. But that's the story of another time. But yeah, it's the first division, like the American 3rd Division, who have got to be up there. They're the two rival, been there, done it, Medal of Honors campaigns. Not that all the other divisions didn't do a lot as well, but they're the two that kind of set the pace, I suppose you would call it.
Oh yeah.
Incredible stuff. Well, we will bring things to an end there. Steve, what we'll do is we will plan some kind of occupation force, the closing down or beginning of the Cold War presentation at some point. But in the meantime, folks, you've got yourself a couple of hours to get ready before the next show. So Alan Converse is coming on talking about the British 50th Division in Normandy. Hard Graft and Little Reward is his title of that. And they had done this pretty much a similar thing. North Africa, Sicily, Italy, Normandy, and we're still there quite late in the game. But anyway, thank you, everybody. Thanks for your questions. I'll see you all later. This is Paul Dutch for World War II TV. Cheers for watching. Bye.